Could be.
Jon Zimmerman.
Hi, Professor Zimmerman. This is Steve Robinson with the Kirk Minihane Show. You're live to tape with Kirk.
Thanks for calling.
Hello, Mr. Zimmerman. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Good, not too bad. So I read your story in the Daily News, the op-ed in the Daily News, and we just went over the whole thing here on the show before we brought you on. I guess before we get to the specific stuff in the story, are your political leanings more left or right?
Well, I'm a liberal. I'm a small L liberal.
Right. Okay.
But I also believe in free speech, and unfortunately, at this time, those two things have often been put in.
Well, if I guess my question is, if this was Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity, or Donald Trump Jr. on a Zoom call, would you be penning the same op-ed?
100%.
You would. Okay. Well, I'll go along with that for argument's sake. So I guess. So how old are you?
I'm almost 60.
Okay, so I'm 45. I'll be 46 in a couple of weeks. So I'm whatever, half a generation younger. I think, and I could be wrong, but I know with my show and my audience, I wonder if you think the taboo for masturbation might be more of your generation than mine is less, and then the next generation is less, like so much else. Because I don't get the sense that around people my age or younger that masturbation is this big taboo subject as it was, say, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, or when you write about it.
Right. Certainly not. I think you're right about that. There's always change over time, but the change is never complete. There's continuity over time as well. And I'd ask you, Steve, why are there... I'm sorry. What's? I think I.
I'm Kirk. I'm Kirk. Steve can answer as well, though. Steve's a prolific. Steve's a good, solid masturbator himself. He can answer those questions.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, to the point you just made, even though certainly there's been more change and perhaps more acceptance, why are there 1,000 different euphemisms for what we're talking about?
Because it's funny. Because it's funny.
Right, okay, so
it's
why?
funny.
I know that you're supposed to be asking the questions, and I'm supposed to be answering them.
Sure.
But there is a question I would like to ask you.
Sure,
I think it's really important. You said they're funny.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
It's
why?
I mean, why is a guy getting kicked in the balls funny? Some things in life, Jonathan, it's funny.
Like little kids falling.
You know what's funny about it, Jonathan? It's funny because, like, I still think of when I think of the jerking off or masturbating, whatever you want to call it. I still think of 12 or 13-year-old Kirk Minihane in his room, eyes closed, letting it rip, praying like hell that my mom and dad don't come home or come upstairs. Like I can't. It's like explaining why the Three Stooges are funny. It's just funny.
Right. See,
No?
I'd like to say that it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, well, it might be.
I'd send you back to the Freud that hopefully you had to read in college at some point.
Ugh, yeah.
And Freud wrote at length about this, and he noted that in every culture there were euphemisms and jokes about this subject that far exceeded any other sexual subject. And I would argue that continues. If Jeffrey Toobin had been caught having sex with a partner on
Zoom,
his camera, which he failed to turn off, it would still be a focus of jokes and controversy.
It would be a huge story. It'd be a huge story.
But not to the same degree.
I don't think that's
true. And there wouldn't be all the jokey asides about the subject we're talking about.
Absolutely would. Totally would. But here's where I think where you lose me on this one. And, I do think that, there is something to the idea, like, I don't care if Jeffrey Toobin masturbates 67 times. I don't care if he masturbates 300 times a day. None of my business. But if he's doing it during work on a Zoom call in an era where, women have spoken up, and I completely respect that, that to me, I think you would agree, like, if you were on a Zoom call with your students today, my guess is you're not going to pull your penis out and start masturbating, correct?
100%. And the piece I wrote has been radically distorted.
Well, you wrote, one second though, Jonathan. You wrote, you might say he shouldn't have been pleasuring himself during a work call, but that's his business rather than yours. Wouldn't it also be the business of the people on that Zoom call?
Absolutely, and the mistake he made was having his camera on.
I would say so.
Don't you think, Professor? Don't you think?
Go ahead, Professor. Continue.
He said that immediately, right? It's radically inappropriate what he did. I didn't write the piece to defend Jeffrey Toobin masturbating on Zoom. What I wrote was trying to ask ourselves why we're so deeply concerned, not just about the fact that it was on Zoom, but the fact that he was masturbating, period.
Yeah, but
I don't know what actually happened.
But Professor, 1 second. Let's be honest. If Jeffrey Toobin was getting a blowjob on this friggin' Zoom video, it would be a huge story. I mean, I think you attach more to the taboo of masturbation than there is today. And look, you could be right, I could be wrong. But what I'm saying is, I think you're thinking, hey, if he was having sex with his girlfriend, or if he was, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Right. It would be a massive story.
That we can't. It's a hypothetical we can't answer.
Well, he may prove us wrong eventually, but yeah.
But right. But nevertheless, right, there's a longer tradition of joking about the masturbation subject. That is without a doubt. You say it's just because it's funny, but of course that re-asks the question about why across time and across cultures people have put a particular accent and a humorous accent on it. And Freud's answer was anxiety over the subject. The things that we laugh about, the things we like to poke fun at, we do so because, we're worried about them. We're anxious about them. Now, to go back to Toobin, look, all I know is what you know, what I've read in the paper, okay? I don't know him. I don't know anything more than you know. But the accounts that I've read suggest that he engaged in this behavior during, breaks in the, in this conference.
Well, I guess, right, yeah. We've seen that.
Right?
Yeah.
I've got to tell you, okay, what he did was massively inappropriate, right, to show this on a screen to people who, incidentally, have not consented to it, don't want to see it, right? That's a no-brainer, okay? But if he had turned off his camera, I didn't have a problem with that.
Well, no, of course. No one would know. Nobody.
Exactly.
Right,
nobody would know.
Well,
That's precisely my point.
But he didn't. So then Right. But I would say this. I mean, look, he can do what he wants. But if he's doing this thing he was doing it for what? WNYC, right? So if he's doing this thing and they're saying take 5 minutes, look, he can do what you want. But my guess is, most people at that point aren't saying, hey, let's grab a quick one and then get back to
Exactly.
I think there's something going on in his brain, maybe. But also, I don't know.
But that's my point. Thank you. That's precisely
to the web I went. To the web I went.
Right?
Go ahead.
Right? What is going on in his brain? Ooh. All right, let's get into that.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Let's go to this very dark place that we think Jeffrey Toobin went to.
Yeah.
Okay? Precisely because
not dark,
we know
not
we
dark,
go to dark
not
places
dark.
as well.
Not dark.
All right? And we're all so concerned and anxious about it. Look, I got to tell you, I'm not. I don't care what his fantasy life is. I do care that he showed that he showed himself. He exposed himself in a Zoom call.
Well,
right?
So I don't think we really
said that.
Right. So actually, at our core, I don't even really think we just. So, for example, we talked about this before you came on. Louis C.K. of course was basically finished because the stories were that he would lock a door with women in front of him and masturbate. Now, I'm going to speak to you for a moment, then you can. I'm guessing, although you are trying to release the shame of masturbation, you have a major problem with Louis C.K. doing that, correct?
Of course not, because that's the issue. There isn't about masturbation, right? It's about consent and harassment.
Right. Well, the women,
right?
the WNYC women, I'm sure, and men who were involved in the Zoom call probably weren't on board with Jeffrey Toobin pulling his penis out and
absolutely. That's why it was wrong for him to do it with a Zoom camera.
But you wrote it was his business rather than yours.
Correct. If in those 10 minutes that's what he wants to do, I can't imagine doing it myself. But you know what? I'm not Jeff Toobin, right?
What do you think?
Nor do I care what he does in his fantasy life or in his 10 minutes between these different calls. And my question is, why are the rest of us so concerned about that, right? The Zoom thing is a no-brainer, Kirk. We agree about that, right?
Uh-huh.
But to me, this whole conversation shows about how it is about something more than that.
Yeah, but if there was no Zoom and there was some story that came up that Jeffrey Toobin masturbates 10 times a week, nobody would care.
Correct. All right? The Zoom thing is what drew our attention to it, right? The Zoom thing is what drew our attention to it. But now our attention's on it, and we're making it about more than Zoom. We're making it about, his behavior, right? And what was, as you put it, on his mind. See, that's what's so scary about masturbation, right? It's solitary, okay? It involves fantasy.
That's why I like it.
We don't know where it's going to go, all right? And, that makes us anxious and worried.
No, you're so right. You're so right. You're so right, Professor. Because occasionally I'll have a scenario, and all of a sudden, like somebody I haven't thought of in like 30 years will walk in. It's wonderful. I think it's a wonderful thing. I wonder what Freud had no porn or anything. What do you think he masturbated to?
That's something I can't talk about. I wasn't alive in Vienna in 1908.
Like I always wonder what, like, you know, like William Henry Harrison or somebody randomly, they just masturbated in the White House. You don't think that's weird to think about?
It doesn't really exercise me very much, right? Not like you. See, I mean, look, all columnists think this, but Kirk, this whole line of questioning is proving my point, right? We'll go, oh, tee-hee-hee, right? What did Freud do? Tee-hee-hee, right? What did William Henry Harrison do? Ooh,
why are you so...
Who cares?
It's funny. I don't know why it's funny. It's funny to think of someone...
Okay, I would suggest we should think more about why you think it's funny.
Well, believe me,
all you're saying is it's funny.
I've been in therapy. I've been in therapy for 35 years. Believe me, we've cracked nothing yet with me. Trust me. I'm trying my best. Steve, you're going to ask something?
Yeah. So, Professor, you're teaching a class. It's on Zoom, and one of your male students pulls a Toobin. He accidentally exposes himself. They were taking a break, same circumstances. You know, he didn't intentionally do it, but he exposes himself. Is there punishment brought down on your male student?
There is. Of course there is.
So then what's the question? Why are you enforcing a stigma?
That's sexual misconduct. Okay? The stigma isn't on masturbation, or I should say it shouldn't be. Okay? The stigma should be on sexual misconduct.
So then you agree that Jeff Toobin is guilty of another case of sexual misconduct?
Sexual misconduct, absolutely. Of course, right? He said that, right? I mean, again, that's a no-brainer. Toobin said that. Like, you can't do this, right? You cannot, without other people's consent, show your privates on a Zoom call. Okay? But that's the problem. The problem was the sexual misconduct, not the masturbation.
Right.
Just in case of
we agree with that. We agree on that. We agree on that.
The problem is with him doing it in front of other people without their consent. Those are two different things.
Do you think, though, that there's an element of the online reaction to this that has nothing to do whatsoever with masturbation, but with the idea of accidentally exposing yourself to the broader world? Because like everybody right now is involved in like Zoom and GoToMeeting and everything, and everyone's worried about what their camera might see. Is it on? Is it off?
Well, yeah.
And there's a little bit of people are like, oh, it wasn't me. There's some like Schadenfreude.
Well, there's that, but I also think there's, as the left will celebrate when the right does something stupid, I do think the right is celebrating because they hate Toobin as well.
Oh, totally.
I mean, I think there's a lot of that.
Probably, and you know, just to be clear, I think that's dirty pool. You know, I really do. You know, I don't think that you should use this episode to, you know, to try to score a political point. I don't really care what his politics are. You know, I think if you're a Democrat or Republican, you shouldn't expose yourself, you know, on a Zoom call or in any other circumstance without the consent, the willful consent of the people around you. Right. Okay, that shouldn't be about politics.
Good. Steve, you get to something else?
So you've said you want to get rid of the taboo around masturbation, but you're also critical of Kirk for making jokes around the subject. So if we get rid of the taboo around masturbation, does that mean we can never have jerk-off jokes ever again?
They won't be as funny, right? And that will be a downside. Okay, I'll admit it to you.
I don't think I'm willing to do it.
I live in the same culture. Right, I've engaged in this ribald humor as well, but you know, I think part of being a human being is to try to figure out why you think certain things are funny.
Well,
right? Yeah. What makes them, you know, taboo in this way? You know, I also think like it's worth asking ourselves historically how and why this came about. You know, it turns out that really until the Enlightenment, like until really the 18th century, masturbation was NBD. People didn't really talk about it a great deal or joke about it. It's very hard to find accounts of it. So why does it become such a big deal starting in the 18th century? The reason is that that's when the West discovers this idea of the autonomous individual, who's endowed with natural rights, that each individual has their own soul, their own purpose, and yes, their own freedoms. And that was at the heart of the founding of this country, okay? But that also brings with it this tension and this really scary danger, because if we're all free and free to think whatever we want, well, aren't we going to think some really ugly and terrible stuff?
Well, not only that,
all right?
Right.
And where does that end?
Well, not only that, like, you know, it's from fathers and, you know, passing down sort of shame for gender. I remember my dad said to me, for example, one time, he said, son, if you keep masturbating, you're going to go blind. And I said, Dad, what are you looking at? I'm over here.
And all that stuff is really a product of the post-Enlightenment world.
Yeah.
And isn't it interesting, right? When we became so enlightened, right?
Yeah.
When we started reading, Voltaire.
Sure, right.
What we ended up doing was stigmatizing masturbation, because masturbation, the reason it got stigmatized is it was the dark underbelly of freedom. That's the way people looked at it, right? We're creating this world of autonomous individuals, but we're really scared about what they're going to do.
Well, Professor, when you masturbate, still, I'm assuming if you do, is it something where, I don't know if you're married? Do you say, hey, I'm going to go masturbate, or do you go do it privately and sort of in a shameful way?
I'm not going to answer. I'm not going to answer.
Well, why not?
I have no problem with you describing that.
Why are you making this topic more shameful? Why are you bringing shame on this? If you're going to be open to talk about it.
It's a fair question, but I understand the culture in which I live. All right? I've got no problem with the concept of the behavior, but I know that other people do, and that's why I don't want to talk about my personal practice.
Here's a weird way where I actually agree. Is I actually feel like I don't feel bad for Toobin because I think he did something stupid, but I actually feel bad like as an adult now. When the Pee Wee Herman story broke and everybody was like, ha, 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 ha. I'm like, the fucking guy went to a place where everyone does it. Who gives a shit? Like that I don't, that I'm with you on.
Yes, and I should also say that I feel bad for his wife and his two kids.
Toobin?
This
You're talking
this wasn't their fault.
Well, 3 kids, right?
They had nothing to do with this. Yeah, 2 adult kids.
Right.
And again, I don't know them. But I feel badly for them because this must be excruciatingly humiliating.
You're not talking about the one he tried to have aborted, right? No. Okay. I'm just I try and get it straight with him all the time. Anything else, Steve?
Yeah, Professor. Are there any sexual stigmas that you think are useful in society?
Yeah, the stigma on assault.
I would say. Yeah.
The stigma on doing any sexual act that doesn't involve the consent of somebody you're doing it with. All right, that absolutely should be stigmatized, and that's why, that's what the Zoom call thing is, right? We should stigmatize what Jeff Toobin did, not his masturbation, okay?
Right.
But the fact that he did it in a non-consensual environment where there were other people there.
Well, it's kind of like, right. It's kind of like with the banana. It's kind of like what the banana said to the vibrator. What are you shaking about? It's me she's going to eat, right?
Precisely.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah. We will talk to you soon, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Professor Jonathan Zimmerman joined us. There you go. I like the guy.